Stay up to date with LN 24/7. LN 24/7. With news, politics, business, sports, and more on LN 24/7. Where the story goes, we go.
Reports say that Africa is the worst affected region by food insecurity, with 1 in 5 people facing acute hunger. That's more than twice the global average. While some analysts hold that what is at the heart of the problem is Africa's failure to accept or embrace genetically modified crops, while others say that food has become a politicized issue and hunger has been weaponized. Well, what we seek to unravel in today's edition of the show is finding out what are the causes. Why is hunger continuing to be a serious issue on the front burner when talking about Africa? And what has exacerbated it? And how can these problems be solved? Well, thank you for joining us on the agenda. My name is Henry Williams. And today we'll be talking about some issues with our talking points, starting in issues of GM crops, the answer to food shortage. We also will be discussing, is organic farming causing climate change? And also we'll be looking at ending Africa's food shortage. And these are some of the issues on our talking points on today's edition of the program. But first of all, the Alliance for Food Sovereignty is a non-governmental organization that believes policymakers of not putting the true stakeholders, which are the local farmers, at the heart of solving the problem of food shortage. But rather, they have been found profiteering by allowing multinationals to take control. Let's take this, and we'll be right back to introduce our guests.
Indigenous seed is very important because it plays a very crucial and critical role for food and nutrition at household level, even at national level. But the policies that we have now, the decisions that are being made are pushing this seed away. Most of the time, the policies that are made impact the farmers in the negative way because these policies are pushed by big multinational companies. The issue here is not about feeding the world. The issue here is about making profit. The first step to making that profit is the seed. When farmers are dependent on this seed, then other inputs will follow. It is the fertilizers, it is the herbicides, and it is the insecticide to control all the other pests that might come because of the kind of food system that we are adopting. The policymakers only get a view from a very small number of people that are able to go to them. The majority of the farmers cannot come to the policymakers. So it is therefore very important that the policymakers go to the farmers and they get confronted by the farmers.
You look on important issues. We prioritize. Now, we don't need to prioritize between a commercial farmer and a small-scale farmer. The majority of this country are made up of what? We are happy today you are listening to us. You are a listening ministry now. For a better, for a change. And get our message to the government.
The agenda of the farmers is to ensure that they have enough food for their families and for the generations that are going to come. The agenda for the farmers is that they protect the biodiversity that is in their communities. But the agenda of the few on the other side is that they make profit of these farmers, taking away knowledge from the farmers, taking away the resource that the farmers have to just favor a few people. we really call for support for the indigenous seed that the farmers have continued to use from generation and generations that have come and have gone. We don't want this seed to disappear. We need to have this seed because it shapes the food and nutrition security at the household level. Therefore, we need to ensure that farmers' voices are heard. And the only way that the farmers are going to be heard is to have dialogues like that, where we take policymakers and farmers and bringing them in one space. We need to bring networks, organizations together. We even need to bring government in our spaces so that we share knowledge on how we're going to conserve our seed, how we're going to share seed, and how we prepare for the future that is coming. If we do not make a proper decision, we will harm the future and we will deny future generations a future that they're supposed to enjoy.
All right, that report actually brings us up to speed with what the issues are, talking about food and food security in Africa. Well, gladly I have joining me on today's program two eminent panelists. I have Joyce Brown, and she's a director of programs and lead on hunger politics, work at the Health of Mother Earth Foundation, HOMEF. She is a food sovereignty and public health activist and has worked extensively to resist the entrenchment of GMOs in Nigeria and the overall corporate capture of the Nigerian food system. Joyce, thank you very much for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me. Good afternoon.
All right, and we also have joining us Karanja Gakuka. He joins us from Washington, D.C. He's a Kenyan journalist working across Africa, Europe, and the U.S., covering African affairs. He's a political commentator focused on matters of African economic independence, politics, agriculture, and geopolitics. All right, welcome, guys. Great to have you both on the program. All right, looking at the issues here. Karanja, we can't hear you. Can we get some audio from you, some response from you, so we know we're good to go?
Are you able to hear me?
Right, fantastic. We can hear you loud and clear. So let me start, ladies first. Joyce, can you come in here? You have been, your organization, HOMEF, is at the forefront of protection of, food sovereignty, I might put it that way. What are your thoughts on the issues? What do you think the issues are when we talk about food security and the push for GMOs in Africa especially?
Thank you so much. And just to mention that you were right to say that hunger is now politicized. That's one of the things that our desk, which we call Hunger Politics, actually addresses. And in that space, we ask the question, why are people hungry? There is this common narrative that Africans are hungry, Nigerians are hungry. And I think we really need to consider what the issues really are. And that's why this conversation is very important. I believe that people are not hungry because the farmers are not able to produce food. There are core issues that bring about people's inability to feed, or people going to bed hungry. For example, we have the poverty, inequalities, the conflict, and the poor infrastructure that affects the movement of food from one part of the country to another. So largely, before we go deep into what GMOs are and how they affect different aspects of our lives as a people or as a country, GMOs are promoted or they are based on lies. So we have to first establish that the issues are not so much of the production of food, but of access to food. The report that we saw kind of summarizes what the issues are, the erosion of support for smallholder farmers, and that's part of what's contributing to the problems that we are having, in addition to how humans are now relating to our environment. And if I should go ahead and answer the first question already, that talks about if GMOs can solve the problem of insecurity, the answer is no. That's because food security depends on the ability of local communities to access markets, to be able to secure their livelihoods, and to be able to produce diverse, nutritious, and safe food for all. GMOs do not address these needs. They are more aligned to large-scale corporate and monoculture-based agriculture, right? And GMOs also kind of reinforces the industrial agriculture model with its huge carbon imprint, dependence on monocultures that reduces biodiversity, to ensure the production of food that is nutritionally diverse, that is safe and healthy for people who need them. So the answer to that question is no. To have food security is to support the smallholder farmers who currently produce more than 70% the food that's consumed on the continent and even globally. Yeah. So to food security is to support them with the needed infrastructure, with extension service, and a number of other things that we may get into as we continue. And also, if we really want to address food security, to attend to the root issues, which are conflict, poverty, inequality of access to resources, and other issues that bring about the unavailability of food and people's ability to access them. Yeah.
And certainly, from what you said, we do have a lot to unpack. Let me bring Karanja into this discussion. Karanja, can you really bear your fangs of your geopolitical experience on what is happening on the continent, especially when it comes to the issues of food security? Are we facing a battle, a new colonial battle here once more?
First of all, so I do not talk about neocolonialism because we haven't even gotten to neocolonialism because we are still colonized. Until we have food sovereignty, until we have sovereignty of the production of our food, until we have sovereignty over our economies, we do not have sovereignty. We do not have independence. So without veering too much into the geopolitical space, we are seeing, for example, all of the extensions of NATO wars in Africa, and for example, with Niger, what's happening between Tinubu and Niger yesterday, shutting down the electricity. That tells you that we do not have independence. So coming back to food, we do not have sovereignty over our food production, and food has become commercialized. The problem of food in Africa has less to do with food production and more to do with the commercialization of food, which has turned food into a commodity for big businesses. We produce enough food, actually, all across Africa to feed Africans. However, this food is not evenly distributed. We are not able to distribute it for a number of reasons. But food production isn't the problem. The world produces enough food to feed over close to twice the world population, about 1.5 times. So about 12 billion people in a world that is only 8 billion people. So we have enough food production worldwide, including in Africa. But food has become commercialized, and it is controlled by the big food and agriculture companies, namely Syngenta, Bayer Crop Science, which used to be Monsanto, which was sued repeatedly across India for a lot of abuses. These companies are selling chemicals, they're selling GMOs, and the primary purpose, I believe, in them making GMOs is not so much to enhance or make these crops better as it is to commercialize food, because when they make GMOs, they also make patents that cannot be that you cannot use without paying them. Their seed, their genetically modified seed, cannot be replanted. It does not produce seed after buying seed for the first time. So this commercialization is really at the heart of the food crisis that we are in now. We produce enough food. Africans have survived through millennia without modern technology because we were able to simply replant the seed from the previous year's crop. That is something that I have shockingly found is not happening even in my own country in Kenya. I was there not that long ago, and everyone is going to the shop to buy seed. We used to have granaries. I used to see my grandmother going to the granaries to fetch seed to plant for the next season. We've never had to buy seed. So this is quite insane. And there are politicians pushing, and I'm sure they're pushing this on behalf of the big Western foreign conglomerate corporations, pushing for policies that would criminalize the sharing of seed. There was one such bill that was being promoted in Kenya that would criminalize the use of seed. There came another bill that was being circulated, and I believe that they're just testing the waters to see how far they can go, that would have disallowed the use of animal fertilizer, the stuff that we have used for millennia to fertilize soil, organic biofertilizer. So I'll yield there and listen to more.
Right. Let's dig in a bit more. One organization that has somewhat been at the forefront of the food, food security and food, trying to resolve the conundrum over food scarcity is the United Nations. And recently it did hold a summit, the UN Food Systems Summit, where the Secretary General Antonio Guterres addressed the UN Food Systems Summit in Rome, Italy, and called for urgent intervention in fighting global hunger by investing in food systems, which he claimed were broken. Let's take a soundbite from him, and we'll get the reactions later.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank, first of all, the government of Italy for hosting this important event with the traditional and wonderful Italian hospitality. This is a gathering about food systems, but it is essentially about people in need and the need to fulfill the most basic of human rights, the right to food. In a world of plenty, it is outrageous that people continue to suffer and die from hunger. The Food Systems Summit, 2 years ago, helped shine a spotlight on a core truth. Global food systems are broken and billions of people are paying the price. More than 780 million people are going hungry, while nearly 1/3 of all food produced is lost or wasted. More than 3 billion cannot afford healthy diets, and 2 billion are overweight or obese. 462 million are underweight. And without access to financing and debt relief, developing countries are struggling to invest in food systems that can reach all people with the nutrition they need to live healthy lives. Meanwhile, unsustainable food production, packaging, and consumption are feeding the climate crisis, generating 1/3 of all greenhouse gas emissions, using 70% of the world's fresh water, and driving biodiversity loss on an epic scale. Many communities are one shock away from plummeting into food.
All right, the Secretary General of the UN there, Antonio Gutierrez, paints a very gloomy picture when we talk about food security, especially on the continent. And I want to ask Joyce. Joyce, what are your thoughts on the role the United Nations has played over the years when it comes to mitigating the crisis over hunger? Do you think it has played, with all its programs and initiatives on the continent, do you think these programs have been effective? Do you share the thoughts of those who say that the UN more or less has been somewhat playing to the gallery about these issues?
Yeah, so I think there is a miscommunication about the real issues here in Africa, and it's something that we need to urgently address, and that is changing the narrative. Um, I mean, out there it looks like the previous speaker has said, Africans are hungry, Africans are going to bed hungry, and the poverty rate is high, and the situation looks so gloomy and helpless. But the truth is, we are not incapacitated when it comes to producing food. And so some of the programs that have been implemented over time have not addressed the real issues. And that is why we are having these sort of conversations to say, look, the issue is not about uh, absence of technology or our inability to adopt or use modern technologies, for example, GMOs. And so, because of the common communications in the global space, some political leaders believe that, oh, for Nigeria, global player, for Nigeria to measure up, we have to adopt these technologies. But the truth is that we do not have to use technologies simply because they exist. We have to, first of all, do a needs assessment. Is this what our country needs? Does this technology does it address the issues that our people are facing? Is this the right tool to address, the challenges that we have? And the question is no. Our farmers are able to produce food, and like it has been highlighted in Nigeria, researches or studies have shown that we produce almost double the amount of food that is consumed. But half of this is wasted because of what? Lack of infrastructure, lack of storage facilities, good roads to location to another. So I think it's important that we as a people, as Africans, we look inward, ask ourselves what the real issue is, where have we missed it, and then address the real problems instead of, adopting sort of one size fits all approaches that do not exactly solve the problems. And, biotechnology in agriculture would create even more problems for us as a people.
Likes of the UN in collusion with the GMO companies, the big multinationals who are pushing GMOs. Do you see a collusion with the UN in all of this?
Sorry, is that for me or for?
It's for you, actually. Joyce, it's for you.
Joyce, please come again with the question.
See a collusion with the UN and the multinationals who are pushing genetically modified crops to Africa?
Well, I think the multinationals will do anything and all it takes to push in these crops. And because of the amount of resources they have, it looks like they are making a headway with that. And that's why we call on African governments to be alert to see what the push for GMOs is, as a profit-making agenda and a move to control African food systems. And it's something that we must resist. So the international companies, the United Nations agenda, whatever it is, we must, as a people, stand for what we want, what we believe that we need, and we must seek solutions that empower our people instead of, solutions that tends to put our local farmers at a disadvantage.
The initiatives, objectives of the Food Systems Summit that was held in Rome is to get all member nations to sign up to the Codex Alimentarius, or food code. The Agriculture Organization of the United Nations says the food the food collection of international standards is a collection of the food code is a collection of international standards, guidelines, and codes of practice to protect the health of consumers and ensure fair practices in food trade. The Codex standards are used worldwide to harmonize national food safety regulations and recognized in WTO agreements on the application of sanitary and phytosanitary measures. Some say this standards, this food code, it's also a medium of control if these nations adopt it. Joyce, are you aware of this?
Well, I don't have so much information on that, but what I would say is that African governments have to be very careful before adopting or signing into some of these provisions. And what we propose, what we push for is sui generis laws that speak to local context. So harmonization of laws across the globe may not work for Africa, because the way agriculture is done here is so much different from the way we have it in the West or in the global North. So we have to be really circumspect before we sign up to some of these provisions. We have to consider our context. We have to see how this will affect, because currently we have an informal system of agriculture. Our system of agriculture is over 70% informal, and that is not the same. It's not the same as we have in other jurisdictions. So we have to carefully examine all of these provisions or attempts at harmonization of laws and be sure that we are making the right decision. And not just make those decisions because we want to on a level playing field with other countries.
All right, Karanja, let me get to you now. Do you think that there are concerns when it comes to the UN? Should our leaders be wary? And do our leaders understand the geopolitical play when it comes to the issues on the global scene? Do they understand how to interact with these guys at the UN? Many have said most of our leaders just go there and sign off the sovereignty of their nations without really knowing the implications of what they are doing.
I do not believe that our leaders are aware of what they're signing. I do not believe that Africa is served by these international organizations. The primary function of these international organizations is to sanitize the actions and activities of Western global capitalism, of Western global vulture capitalism, exploitative, extractive capitalism. The purpose of the UN is to be a PR. It's the PR arm of global imperialism. It serves no other purpose. It provides this seeming presence of people that care, that are trying to do something, and meanwhile distracts African governments, people in the global South, from doing the things that they need to be doing for ourselves. Remember, the West has always been very good at PR. They have always had impeccable words while conducting despicable acts. Remember that in the United States, the words that all men are created equal were written by a slave owner. The irony of that. The UN is just an extension of that doublespeak, that ability to do public relations while doing despicable acts. And the UN is the PR arm of that allows people to believe that there is good coming from the West. There is no good coming from the West as far as Africa is concerned. The only purpose, the only thing that the UN has served, the food code is serving, is the protection of Western capital and the expansion of Western extractive capital. So there's very few leaders that have demonstrated that they understand this. I would single out the leaders of Burkina Faso, Mali, Guinea, and in the French-speaking West African countries, I think that the populations there, the actual citizenry, is understanding this. I do not believe that people in the English-speaking African world have quite gotten a grasp of that. And so statements such as the ones that I'm making would be seen as extreme and would be dismissed in the English-speaking world. But the citizenry, I believe, in the French-speaking world, because of the brutality of French imperialism, understand this. I just don't know that there are many leaders other than the president of Zimbabwe in the English-speaking world. And then the president of Eritrea, who is, they're not English speaking. But anyway, the point being that we cannot trust organizations that were built and formed by the very same colonizers during colonialism in the 1940s, when our countries were under the thumb of colonialism, under the yoke of colonialism. How can we now trust that these same organizations built by the same people during the actual system of colonization, how would we expect them to have been made for us? They are not made for us. That's why the 5 members of the Security Council, of the Permanent Security Council, other than China and Russia, are the former colonizers. They're protecting their interests in the UN, using the UN as a PR arm. We have no business, really, following anything to do with UN, anything, quite frankly. Africa has no business being in the UN. We need to have a serious conversation about exiting those international organizations, because they do not serve us. They are pure PR for global Western capitalism, vulture, extractive, exploitative capitalism.
And Karan just spells it out there about his perspective on what the UN serves, not looking like it serves serves purposes of Africa, but Western interests. When we take a quick break now and return, we'll be looking at the question, what are the disadvantages? What are the implications of, embracing the GMO crops on our continent? Why is the implications not being debated? Why is it just, being taken hook, line, and sinker by African leaders? We'll take that message and we'll be right back. Stay with us.
Stay up to date with LN 24/7.
America and Asia. We give you news as it breaks from the perspective you can trust. Ellen.
Underdog, and there's so much blame to pass around. Who done it, they say. With roughly 500 million of its population under the age of 35, Africa is currently the world's youngest continent. What are we going to do with this? We must change the African narrative. We must engage to orchestrate new and positive outcomes and solve the socio-political and socio-economic problems of the continent. So you're young, on campus, want to be the change? Join the vanguard. Introducing the Africa for Africa Youth Initiative, maximizing Africa's resources.
All right, great to have you back on the agenda. And we've been unpacking a lot, talking about food security. And one of some of the issues we've been delving into is, are GM crops the answer to food shortage? Is organic farming causing climate change? That we will be talking about shortly. And how do we end Africa's food shortage? Gladly, I have two guests with me, and Joyce Brown is here, representing HOMEF, and Karanja Gakuka. Both of them have been saying quite a lot. And look, still unpacking these issues, one question being asked is, in spite of looking at European nations who are pushing these GMO crops to Africa, they have actually banned them in their own countries. But we find that African leaders are still considering, and some embracing it, such as Nigeria. And lately we've heard Kenya as well. South Africa has been on that road for quite a while. But in spite of that, we see issues, scientists coming out to say some things that should keep African leaders, gives them some concern. In a new study, gene editing tool CRISPR is said not to be as precise as expected, according to researchers. Now, the London-based molecular genetist, Dr. Michael Antonio, commented, given these findings, the likelihood of unpredictable changes in multiple gene functions leading to altered biochemistry in gene editing food plants with consequent health risks is very real. Now, with all these concerns, it is interesting that back at home, we do have reputable scientists. Why are they not speaking out? Let me talk to Joyce. Joyce, can you share your thoughts on this matter? Why is it, the likes of Nigeria recently opening their doors to GMO crops, despite the fact that Western nations pushing these crops have banned them in their countries, and with reports and, alarming reports coming out over the implications of using GMO crops that actually have a inimical, a very dangerous impact on the DNA of those who consume them.
Yeah, I think you can blame that on the strong propaganda by these multinational companies. And I mean, we will agree that they are very, they have all the resources they need. But then if we have government officials who understand the implications of GMOs for not just human and environmental health, for the economy of Nigeria, I think we would be able to make more better informed decisions with regard to GMOs. So we do have scientists in Nigeria who understand the issues, and who, over time we have worked with, who in the campaign against GMOs. But obviously our voices, we need more people to get in on this conversation. We need to have more journalists, making publications and saying the truth about GMOs, because we have
What about the scientific community in Nigeria, research? Aren't they saying anything about this?
They are. We have a couple of scientists that have come out to make statements about GMOs, about how we need to do more long-term assessments before we open our doors to GM crops. But the government is not listening, and we have a law that is supposed to regulate biosafety in Nigeria, to regulate the use of GMOs. But that law has major flaws, fundamental flaws, that will not allow it to regulate GMOs as it should. There are provisions in there that actually allow the influx of GMOs without proper checks. So these are some of the things we need to address. And I mean, there's not much the scientific community will do if we have a law and a biosafety regulatory agency that kind of overstamps, on GMO applications for GM crops to the country.
I mean, I go to the grocery stores, I buy fruits and apples and all of that. And recently I noticed these apples start rotting from within. You cannot, replant any seeds from these fruits that we buy these days. And we don't, one of the issues that it doesn't seem as if they are labeled. There are no labeling. So you find out that you cannot make a choice. There's no regulation on giving the consumer the right to choose in these issues.
Yeah, and I mean, labeling would help to an extent, but at Tomek, we do believe that with the way food is sold in Nigeria, labeling will not solve the problem. So we have, look at one of the major crops that has been approved for commercial release in Nigeria. That's the cowpea, which we commonly known as beans. You know how beans is sold in open markets, in basins, in baskets. How would you label that for people who purchase food, in open markets, to know what they're purchasing? And when that beans is processed into akara, for example, or moi moi, how would you know if that food, if that moi moi or akara is made from GM beans? So we see that the context that we have here will not even labeling will not even allow people make informed choices. Yeah, because majority of our people do not buy food from supermarkets. And even when they buy, even when they are labeled, because there was a time we had to go through major malls in major cities in Nigeria to see, to actually check if there are GMOs, and some imported and processed, products that were labeled to contain genetically modified ingredients. But these labeling, some of them are in so tiny letters that it's difficult for you to see them. And then some are written in, different other languages, especially those that are imported from China. So our people are not aware. We've been trying to make, sensitize people. Oh, you have to look at, product labels to be sure what you're buying. But the problem still remains. So it's something we need the government to take up, to take a stand against that. Look, we have to do long-term assessment to ensure that these are actually safe. We hear, safety assessments have been done, but you don't get to see the reports of those assessments. So by and large, we have to, as a country, hold the brakes on GMOs, because in the first place, they are not needed.
All right. Let me go to Karanja. Karanja, your country, Kenya, right now seems to have opened its doors based on experience of drought and all of that, and has opened its doors to GMOs. Ruto is a man that I hugely respect, especially how he's been so much outspoken over the way Africa has been ill-treated by Western leaders recently and in the past. What is the responsible for some of these decisions that our leaders take? Is it compromise? Is it the fact that some of these leaders are in cahoot? Is it still the slave problem, where the slavers came to Africa and there was collusion in getting slaves out of Africa to Western countries? That's taking place right now.
President Ruto recently admitted on live TV in an address that he was blackmailed to going to the Washington U.S. Africa Summit in Washington in December. He specifically said that we African leaders, so referring to himself and his fellow leaders, as having been blackmailed with threats that if they did not go to the Africa Washington Summit, the summit in the charade in Washington D.C., that there would be consequences. I do not believe that policies being made anywhere in Africa that pertain to international corporations are being willingly. The text of these bills and what have you, is simply being copy pasted. Is simply being sent to these leaders from Washington. It's quite spectacular to see the speeches of Tinubu and Ruto immediately after election or immediately after being inaugurated, how similar they are. Kenya ended fuel subsidies immediately after Ruto became president. Same thing. The text of the justification for removing fuel subsidies was exactly the same. The text of Peter Obi's appeal to the Supreme Court is exactly the same as the text of Raila's petition to the court, to the Supreme Court of Kenya. So I do not believe. So I think it's actually even less of a case of collusion than it is a case of bullying and blackmail and coercion. I said earlier, we are not independent. So we are not making policy that suits us. Antonio Gutierrez, in that address that he was making earlier, pointed out that obesity was one of the one of the problems, right? And obesity is one of the leading risk factors for premature death, linked to 7.4 million deaths globally in 2017. 39% of the world adults are overweight, and 13% of adults in the world are obese. So clearly, food, the production of food, is not the problem. The problem is the distribution of food, ensuring that it reaches people where it's needed, and food policy has become commercial policy. These are the problems. So the bills on GMOs have nothing to do with what's good for us. And I actually do not believe that our presidents have any say when it comes to those policies that they are pushing when it comes to things like GMOs. For example, I'll give you an example. It's related, but it's not directly pertaining to food. But for example, last week, there was an announcement that Kenya is going to be sending 1,000 troops to Haiti, 1,000 police officers to Haiti to train the Haitian police. Do you really want to tell me that Kenya sat down and had a conversation with Haiti, a country we don't even share a language with? And yes, we share history, and Kenya should be helping Haiti as much as we can, but that is not a conversation that was had between Kenya and Haiti. That was a conversation that was had between Anthony Blinken. And by the way, the announcement came after a phone call from Anthony Blinken and visits from American officials. There was a visit from an American official recently to Kenya from the Treasury to threaten Kenya. I wish I had pulled it up. To threaten Kenya about its communications and overtures towards Russia and China, threatening Kenya that we were going to consequences for interacting with China and Russia. So we do not have independence.
All right, connection issues there, but let me quickly go to Joyce as our time winds down. Joyce, please, can you kindly wade into these issues? The relation between climate change and food production has been a source of controversy, with GM crops said to be a good way to go if we are to mitigate it. Now, one of the reasons cited by UN-backed studies, food waste causes approximately half of global greenhouse emissions. What are your thoughts on this? Okay, we don't have Joyce there. Okay, Karanja, are you there?
Second, do you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Karanja, I'd really love you to wade into this issue, this controversial issue, the connection between climate change and food production. The UN says one of the reasons cited is that a study a UN-backed study is that food waste causes approximately half of global greenhouse emissions. Is this another Trojan horse to push this, agenda into Africa?
Well,
I think that if they're saying that food waste is part of the problem, that's part of what is causing climate change. I think that what they're doing is making the point that myself and Joyce are making here, which is that there's too much food. There's already enough food being produced. We have no business trying to work on producing more food. What we have to be doing is working to ensure that there is less food waste, that there is that there is more of an ability to distribute food and get it to where it needs to get to. The problem, clearly, I think that study is confirming exactly what we are saying.
It also suggests that we use up too much land, and in a bid to reduce the quantity of land used for farming and produce more is to go GM.
Much land. Maybe they use too much land in the West, but not for us in Africa. So, that's part of the problem with these global studies. So, you cannot conflict, you cannot mix up a study and just and provide the results that a study done globally over the whole world and then applied to every single country and applied to every single continent, because Africa is definitely not overusing our land. In fact, we are not overusing anything. We do not produce we contribute less than 2% to greenhouse gases. So that's a Western problem. It has nothing to do with Africa. So Africa needs to pursue policies that suit us. But I agree on one thing, that we don't need to increase the use of the amount of land being used, maybe marginally, but as it is, I don't think that overuse of land is a problem in Africa. 70% of food produced in Africa is produced by smallholder farmers. That is actually a good thing, and we should encourage it.
All right, Karanja, I really need to thank you for joining us right now. I would love to say we're done on this matter, but we're far from it. But time is not our friend, and we have to go. Thank you so much, Karanja Gakuka, joining us from Washington, D.C. in the United States. Thank you so much for your thoughts.
Thank you for having me. By the way, it's Karanja Gashusha. I kept forgetting to correct that. It's Gashusha, but thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for the correction. And thank you, Joyce Brown, Director of Programs at Lead on Hunger Politics. She's Director of Programs at Mother of Earth Foundation, HOMEF. Thank you, Joyce. It's been great having you on the program. I do hope that we'll have another opportunity to actually talk deeply on these issues.
I really hope so too. There is a lot more grounds to cover, but thank you so much for having me. And I believe that some great lessons have been passed across.
All right, great stuff. And that's where we'll have to leave it. And that's where the sun sets on this one, talking about food security in Africa. There is so much to talk about. And I want to thank our guests who have been with us. And I want to thank you as well for staying with us on the agenda. You can learn more about what we've talked about when you go to our website. There are discussions there. One of the topics, genetically modified crops and the threat to food sovereignty report. It's on the LN247.news website. You get to read more about that. There's so much on that you can glean. Agroecology is the future of farming, some say. And it's diverse like nature. It's productive, double yields in just few years, as resilient to climate change and puts carbon back in the ground, according to experts. It's efficient, less inputs, less waste. It's culturally appropriate. And local innovations and solutions are what we need. And as the saying goes, only Africans can build Africa. Want to thank you for staying with us on today's edition of The Agenda. Don't forget, you can find us on LN247.news. My name is Henry Williams. And remember, Africa is the last frontier. God bless you, and we'll see you same time on this station. Bye for now.